Welcome to Thriving in the Game, a podcast dedicated to exploring what Black women need to navigate the corporate world of technology, offering insights, strategies, and personal stories that will affirm, validate, and encourage you on your journey up the corporate ladder. I'm your host, Alicia. Join me as we learn how to thrive together. Authenticity in the corporate tech world is always such a nuanced subject. You'll often hear the phrase, be authentic, which usually means be the professional version of you that fits within that organization's definition. But we already know that corporate structures were not designed with Black women in mind, so we have to be intentional in finding environments where we can focus on what authenticity truly means. To be authentic means to be genuine, reliable, and to be true to yourself in accordance with your values and beliefs. So as we've explored throughout this season, you first have to know yourself and your values in order to truly walk authentically and thrive in this corporate game. Now, I knew if I wanted to touch this subject, it had to be with just the right person. With that in mind, there are some conversations where you just have to sit back, listen, and learn. And that is exactly what I did with my next guest. Miss Annette Moore is the former Deputy for Strategy in the NASA Office of the Chief Information Officer. She's a proud Houstonian and graduate of Prairie View A&M University, and in 1981, she began her career in the Space Shuttle program at the Johnson Space Center. With an illustrious career in engineering analysis, modeling, education, policy, technology, strategy, and leadership, it was my absolute honor and pleasure to have her on the show. As we delved into what it looks like for early and transitioning career women to show up authentically in the workplace, we took just a little extra time to explore her personal journey.
I'd like to tell you, if it's okay, just a little bit about me. I am one of 8 children. I grew up in Houston, Texas, went to school there my primary years, middle age school and high school, and I went to college at Prairie View A&M University. So in my senior year in high school, my mom approached my counselors and she said, I know you got scholarship opportunity for my daughter, and I want her to major in engineering. She did not give me a choice. She explained it to me and she said, you will not find very many people who look like you in engineering. Black, female. I had very little say so about that, but I am so grateful and so thankful for her vision, right? And her tenacity and really pushing me and propelling me. I had a very unfortunate thing happen my very first year that I was at Prairie View A&M University. My mom took ill and she passed of breast cancer. That was a very tumultuous, very difficult experience for me, but I certainly learned that value and that principle of community, team building, teamwork. My entire community surrounded me. They knew that I had lost my mother. And I did not realize that at the time, but that was probably a lot of the impetus and the start of me giving back to others and really wanting to have that nurturing experience, that cultivating experience with others that I later developed in my career. But I will be honest with you, that was just a really bad experience. And I literally almost flunked out of school. So I went back, I completed my bachelor's of science in electrical engineering. Several years later, I went back and I got a degree in elementary education. And I will tell you that was a tribute to my mother. And then that was actually part of the process as I started with NASA as a contractor working the Space Shuttle program. I'll never forget, I walked into the Rockwell International Human Resources office, and this lady, Joy was her name. She saw me and she looked at me and her eyes just lit up. And I didn't quite get that then, but I certainly get that now. I worked with Rockwell International before I actually entered into the civil servant workforce of the federal government. That was a very rocky start for me. I had an African-American female boss at the time. And I thought, this is fantastic. This is great. I can learn under her. She can mentor me. I can really support her. I was really committed to making her successful. At that time, there were not very many Black senior executives at NASA, and certainly not at NASA headquarters. And so I was very proud, very happy to be supporting the lady that I was supporting in that role. And so it was quite disappointing to me to see that that was not necessarily reciprocated. I had such a horrible experience. I will never forget this. I was standing in her office one day. I'm going to interject a lot of my faith here because the foundation of who I am and what I believe and what I do and how I lead as a leader, how I lead in my life is foundational to my faith and my family. I could hear the Holy Spirit literally say to me, quit your job. And so I left the office that day. I went home. I completed my letter of resignation. I came back to the office the next day, and my boss was not in the office at the time. She was off on travel. And I put my letter of resignation on her desk, and I went home. The instant that I walked in the door, my phone rang, and it was actually my graduate advisor. She was sharing with me that she was leaving the university and she was no longer going to be my graduate advisor. Now, get this, as she told me her story, it mirrored my story exactly. And I said, oh my Lord, this is what this journey was all about. It was never about the job. It was never even about my boss. It was always about, was I going to trust the journey that God had put me on? Even though it didn't look the way that I thought it was going to look, even though it didn't turn out the way that I thought it was going to turn out, even though it didn't feel the way that I thought it was going to feel. And so I was obedient, turned in my resignation, left that job. On the day that I was supposed to be leaving that job, I did not have another job. I had gone into the office and I got called and said, someone wants to see you on the 9th floor in the A suite. And the A suite at the headquarters building is always where the NASA administrator, deputy administrator, where they sit. And so I went up, go up, I sit and I wait. Then the second in charge of NASA at that time, the deputy administrator, his deputy met with me. To this day, I do not know who went up to her office and said, there is a young lady who is getting ready to quit. And she is good stock and we don't want to lose her and we need to do whatever we can do to keep her. To this day, Alicia, I have no idea who did that. I have no idea who said that. So I sat in her office and she began to talk with me about my experience and my journey. She said, I want you to send me your resume and I want to talk to you later this afternoon before you leave for the day. So I go to my office, get my resume, send it to her. Little to my knowledge, I did not know she did this. She had called back at Johnson Space Center where I had originally started, and she just started calling around and asking people about me. And so I guess the report was good enough. Before I left that day, I had 4 interviews. When I got home that evening, I had 8 phone calls from Suzanne. Call me when you get in. And I finally got a hold of her. She said, everybody that you interviewed with today asked me, when can she start working for me? I never saw that coming. That was my first introduction to a mentor and an advocate. And that's when I learned the difference between the two as well. Mentor is someone who walks alongside of you, who coaches you, who helps you, who actually guides you, directs you, helps you in your development. An advocate is that person who is in the room around the table and you're nowhere around. And they can speak on your behalf. They can advocate for you. They can open doors for you that you cannot open for yourself. And Suzanne was both of those things for me. And I think that's where I gained my appreciation. And I use this when I mentor individuals and when I coach individuals. Sometimes we're so focused on if we're a right fit for an organization, if we're a right fit for a team. And we miss a very critical point. Are they a right fit for us? And certainly, I'm going to say this as women, we sometimes don't do that because we're so busy being a good fit for everyone else and everything else, right? And so that began my career in leadership. I served in several key positions in the Johnson Space Center Chief Information Office. And then one day, my boss says, Annette, I have something I'd like you to do. His deputy at the time was going back to school to complete her JD. He wanted me to step in as his deputy. I said, so how long do you want me to do this acting deputy role? He says, just a year. And oh, by the way, your first 3 weeks that you're doing that job, you're going to have to do her job and my job because I'm going to be in Europe for 3 weeks on vacation. And so he says, what I do need to do, I need to clear that with the center director. And so he says, we're going to go tomorrow and we're going to talk to Mike. I'm going to let him know that you're going to be stepping in as my acting deputy for a year. And your first 3 weeks, you'll be serving as acting deputy and acting CIO for the center and acting director for the organization. I said, okay. So that morning I get up, I'm praying like I do every morning. And I had 2 things that I was praying for in particular. Don't let me mess up and embarrass you and embarrass myself in my organization. And then the second thing that I asked for, I wanted to have an opportunity to meet the director of HR and to build a relationship with the director of HR. Now, you might ask why. That is the person who touches every individual at that center. I don't care what your organization is. And so I drive through the gate, get out of the car, go up to Larry's office. We're by the elevator. We're getting ready to go meet with the center director so we can drop this bomb on him, right? And Larry says, oh, by the way, I wanted to ask you something. I said, sure. He says, Natalie is getting her coaching certificate and she has to have someone as part of her coaching program that she coaches for 6 months. And she's asked me if I thought you would mind her coaching you. Oh, Alicia, did I forget to tell you Natalie was the director of HR?
He already had it organized.
He already had it organized. To this day, Natalie and I are friends. And so that has been my journey. And what I've learned most of all is that my journey is not just for me. It's for every person that God allows me to come in contact with, to come alongside me. I once had a mentor tell me, if you come in the room and you sit at the table and there's no one who looks like you, look around the room and see who you need to make room for at the table. I can recall sitting around the senior staff table at Johnson Space Center at NASA headquarters, watching and looking and paying attention. It was very easy for me to say, oh my gosh, I want to mirror that. And it was just as easy for me to recognize and say, I don't think that's how I want to show up. I don't think that's who I want to be. And if there was something that you learned in the Moore household, you learn integrity. Doing what's honest, doing what's right, doing what's fair, doing what's equitable, doing what's decent. And that helped me to develop what I call now my non-negotiables. I have 3. They've been the same. I have no intention of changing them. I'm not doing anything illegal, immoral, or unfair. And those are my 3 non-negotiables. And I often tell people that is authentically who you are. And so you're going to show up in your authentic self, whether that was your intention or not, right? On my technical teams that I led, you are known for your skills and your capabilities. The hard part is teaching people those soft skills, right? Those soft skills are very hard. Communications, being transparent, being fair, working together as a team, how to use that for the benefit of all and not just for yourself. And you really have to have someone who is committed to taking an introspective look and saying, I really want to master this. I really want to be better than how I'm showing up today. I really want to be authentic in my craft and what I do. And you only get part of it if you get the technical piece. If you don't get those other pieces, then you have not gotten the whole of the picture, right? So showing up authentically as a Black female in a highly competitive, highly male organization, right? Showing up authentically as myself. That was something that I had to be purposeful about every day. And not just purposeful about it, but I had to be deliberate about it. Fast forward, George Floyd's murder. And by then we're virtual. I'm the Johnson Space Center CIO. I've been in the role for several years at the time. And during COVID, we're remote working. Nobody's really coming into the office. I said, I'm losing the perm. And I asked my niece to braid my hair. This was going to be quite a change, right? But I felt I had to make a statement, and I felt I had to authentically stand in my person in a way that I had not before. But I'm going to tell you something. I have a confession. I was afraid to turn on my camera. My hair was in braids. I didn't have the perm anymore. I didn't have the curls. And I was afraid to turn on my camera. And I said to myself, there's something very wrong. You are a senior executive in the federal government. You are the Johnson Space Center CIO. You're the director of the IT organization of the center. Why are you afraid to turn on your camera? And it wasn't because of who I am. It was because of how others perceived me or the box that others had put me in. And so I turned on my camera and I said, you know what? This is going to be okay. I'm going to have to acclimate your way of thinking, not just about me, but about others who have been boxed in, right? And so what I realized is that it didn't matter if my hair was braided or permed. Didn't matter. I was still Annette. I was still authentically me. And so as I've gone through the years, as I've mentored individuals, as I've coached individuals, as I've served on panels, on keynote, that realness that people see that they can relate to. And so I felt that it was my responsibility as a leader, as an individual, to make sure that every person in my organization, every person that I encountered had an authentic experience in their work environment. They were able to unapologetically, with respect for others, of course, be themselves and be real. People are always watching you. Mm-hmm. They're always watching you. They're always paying attention. What kind of example are you leaving for people? Are you leaving an example that they want to model, that they want to follow, right? What kinds of values and tenets are you displaying to others, right? Is it something that when they're sitting around the senior staff table and they're looking around the room and they're listening to other senior leaders, are you someone that they say, I want to be that person? I want to be that person of integrity. So 43 years total in federal government. And my last year at my retirement celebration, I got an award named after me, the Annette Moore Integrity Award. It says this award recognizes a civil servant or contract who serves as a authenticity, moral barometer, and demonstrates humility with others, contributes in non-traditional ways with a commitment to professionalism, trustworthiness, and honesty, speaks up and raises concerns with tact, or supports others' challenges to popular thought and opinion in order to make improvements to the organization, is passionate about making the organization a better place for all. And I sat and I was listening to that because I did not necessarily think that I was making a difference or an impact. And that, for me, was a highlight of my career.
Your journey has covered a number of different questions and points that I had when we think about early career Black women or transitioning career Black women who are new to technology and starting their career in this field. Oftentimes we hear, be authentic and show up authentically. And I do think authenticity covers a number of different things. As you've talked about your hair, and that is something that Black women, we are always kind of weighing that decision, right? So there's that aspect, but there's something beautiful about what you said in terms of having the 3 tenets that represent you, that are non-negotiable, that represent your character, how you show up, how you do what you do, the way you do it, that I think is really the point of this conversation. which is, how as an early career Black woman, how do I show up authentically without limiting my opportunities? And it's not about turning yourself into someone else. We are not white males. We can't ever be white males. And I think sometimes we think the way of navigating is trying to implement those behaviors like someone else. And ultimately, it's inauthentic and it drains you. So in listening to your journey, your 3 tenets, do you feel like they've come over time, or were you solid in those then?
I think I was going through a refining process of them. I wasn't going to do what was immoral. My faith has taught me, my family values have taught me I wasn't going to do anything illegal. Those 3 non-negotiables, they were going through that testing fire. And that continued probably over the next 7 to 8 years of my career. And I'm going to go so far as to say it continued, and I was solid in them. I was sure in it, but tell you one thing, they continue to be tested.
So a couple things. One, as I was doing research for this topic, there's a Better Up article from 2021, and the author Meg Lyons, PCC, she talks about being your authentic self is easier said than done, but worth it. And so that aligns with what I hear you saying. And so one of the things that she says is living authentically is like any learning process. It starts with reflection to pause and become self-aware of who you are. From a place of strengthened awareness, you can begin to show up as your authentic self in your relationships, at work, and in life. But living in line with your values, paying attention to your goals and their importance, and then reflecting on your journey, you can become energized and grounded by being the truest version of yourself.
I believe that. Yeah.
And the beauty of that, but what I also think is key for early career, or again, transitioning career women to understand is, like you said, that's a process.
It's a process.
It's going to be, it could be 7, 8 years, a decade, and then even still continually being tested and refined in your values.
Yes, but absolutely.
But how did you identify those values? How did those 3 things become your tenets?
So, not doing anything immoral. My faith, definitely. Growing up in the church, going to Sunday school, those things were constantly instilled in us. So if people don't grow up with those same values and tenets and beliefs, and let's fast forward to you are now 37 years old in your career, and you're working with someone who can't even remotely identify with those values and those beliefs, right? That's when your authenticity will be tested and tried.
But how do you advise someone who hasn't necessarily grown up with those values, right? So then me as a young woman, how do I start to develop my own value script?
So I always ask people, so what's important to you? And I have this question. I said, so what do you want to be when you grow up? Because in their mind, I'm already grown up. What do you mean, what do I want to be when I grow up? And I always tell them, I'm not asking you what job do you want to have. I'm not asking you what title do you want to hold. I'm asking you, what do you want to be when you grow up? Do you want to be a person who is true to your word? Do you want to be a person who is reliable, who is dependable, who is trustworthy? Do you want to be a person who is fair to everyone on your team that you lead? Do you want to be a person who seeks to pull the best out of each individual on your team? Do you want to be the person who shows up for the people on your team, right? And what I'm really asking them is, who do you want to be when you grow up? How do you want others to see you? How do you want to see yourself? How do you want to be seen and perceived, right? And so that helps me to make the distinction now between how I can help someone down this path. And even if somebody is going down a totally, completely different path, there's still an opportunity for me to help them, particularly if they see themselves being in some critical positions, leadership positions, and influencing and impacting the lives of others. Then it is my obligation to help them do that in a way that it is responsible for those other individuals and not just themselves.
I love that question in terms of not only what do you want to be when you grow up? Because I that's something I've always said. Like, I still don't know what that is. But who I want to be when I grow up is a question that resonates with me. Because that's something I've carried with me as I become a leader, and knowing, like you said, the reasons why I want to be, quote unquote, in charge. But as I think about early career Black women who are trying to prepare for that leadership journey, I think being able to answer that question, who do you want to be? Mm-hmm. Especially given that you and I have both had adverse experiences with Black women being in authority over us in the workplace.
And I think the co-partner to who is why.
Yeah.
Why? Who do you want to be and why do you want to be that?
Yeah.
Why?
When you think about your tenets and what feels authentic to you, do you feel like that you had to compromise that in any way in the workplace? Or were you challenged to compromise?
Yes. In my career, I was absolutely challenged. Did I ever feel like I compromised? No. But I feel like I paid a heavy price for not being willing to compromise, right? I got left out of meetings, introductions, my white male counterpart, introductions that were made on his behalf weren't made on my behalf. And I can remember telling my boss, my last week of work, I said, there are meetings that I cannot go into unless I'm invited into those meetings. I said, there are relationships that I cannot create on my own. They have to be brokered on my behalf. There are introductions that I can't make on my own. Those introductions have to be made for me. And that was not done for me. And it wasn't done for me because I would not move off of my non-negotiables.
Do you feel like you have Annette's definition of authenticity, and maybe there's a corporate or federal or technology version of authenticity that you're constantly trying to marry with your non-negotiables?
Yes, and here's why. Because you have to be wise. You have to be discerning. Right? And so I had to negotiate a certain way. But let me be very clear. I was not going to move off of my non-negotiables. That's why they are non-negotiables. But I had to maneuver maybe a certain way, right? I had to broach the conversation a certain way. I had to, and I'm just going to say it raw and real, I had to maybe stroke someone's ego or make them not feel uncomfortable with the truth that I was uncovering or revealing and present it to them in a way that it was more palatable, more acceptable, because I would constantly say to myself, what is your goal coming out of this conversation? Don't lose focus in that of what you want to achieve and what you want to get out of this, right? I would start with asking myself, what is your goal and your intent coming out of this? What do you want to achieve? And go in and really, no kidding, do no harm to that goal and that intent. While at the same time, don't sell out your non-negotiables, right?
I think that's healthy for early career women to understand. You could take the perspective, I speak up and I speak for other people, and that's authentically me. So that's how I'm going to show up. Otherwise, I'm not being authentic. And it's like, no, you're still being authentic, but you're also operating with wisdom and with nuance.
You may not be able to relate to this, but do you remember the vampire movies, the black and white vampire movies? Okay. So how did they kill the werewolf? With a silver bullet. That was your go-to, the silver bullet. I don't use my silver bullet on everything, but I want to exercise some wisdom and some discernment to know when to use my silver bullet, right?
You mentioned what I would call a personal sacrifice. There have been moments where you have refused to move away from your non-negotiables. And of course, that resulted in maybe you being excluded. How do you weather that? How do you navigate that? Because I've experienced it. I've seen others go through it.
So exclusion is a funny thing. And if I got excluded and I was able to maintain me and hold on to me and who I am, I'm okay that I got excluded. Because, Alicia, there are some circles I don't want to be in. There are some rooms I don't want to be in. There are some tables that I don't want to be sitting at, right? But you got to be okay with that. If you're why, remember your who you want to be and why do you want to be that? If your why cannot sustain not being at the table, you might want to reassess your why. I'm okay in some cases where I've been excluded. And where I've been excluded, not because I wasn't qualified, not because I wasn't smart, not because I wasn't capable. I was just excluded just because. Woman, Black, just because, right? That's about them. That's not about me. Something my grandparents used to tell me all the time. What people say about you, what they do to you, how they treat you, that says everything about them. That has nothing to do with you. So don't take that on.
And how do you do that? Because again, generally when you're earlier in your career, you're earlier in your years of expertise, of age, et cetera, and even transitioning into this field, it still puts you in a similar cohort. So how do you weather that? Because it can, being excluded, I mean, I can't lie. It's painful. It's hard.
It's painful. I can remember times I left the JSC senior staff. I would go to my office, close my door, and cry. But let me tell you what that comes back to. You have got to know at the core of everything that happened, you have got to know who you are, right? Because if you don't know who you are, somebody's going to make you believe you're somebody that you're not. You cannot make me believe that I am not qualified. You excluded me, but I know I'm qualified. So you got to know who you are. That's why it is so important for us as women, as Black women. You got to know your skill. You got to know your craft. You got to be sharp. You got to know that you got to know it 10 times harder than another person. Okay, so that's getting old and that's getting boring. But guess what? I can stand on that because I know that I know that I know that I know it, right? And I'm going to tell you something we always have to do. You better have on your skates because you always ought to be ready to pivot. Not pushed by somebody else, because that's somebody else doing that to you.
Right.
But you always ought to be in a point where you can pivot. Don't be caught unprepared. Don't let someone else be in control of your destiny.
We started this season talking about belonging and very much in alignment with what you were saying in terms of it's not about you fitting into an organization. It's about looking at, does this fit my goals? Does this fit my values? Does this fit with me? And then our second episode was literally the power of the pivot, because so much of our career it's not a straight line. And any of us can get into our dream organizations, our dream jobs, only to realize there's a lack of alignment. And so, like you said, not necessarily responding to a push, but being able to pivot and redirect and adjust your goals, maybe even temporarily, or maybe just choosing a new direction. But ultimately, you were empowered to do that.
Absolutely. I encourage people to not let stuff happen to you so much as you are planning and positioning yourself and posturing yourself for that next thing, right? You've got to do that. Now, sure enough, some stuff we can't see. And not all the stuff is bad that happens. What happened to me at headquarters when I first became a civil servant, and that lady did what she did, I thought it was bad. But because of what she did, I went to the headquarters CIO organization. I became the Johnson Space Center acting deputy CIO. I became the Johnson Space Center deputy CIO. I became the Johnson Space Center CIO and director of the IT organization. And I became the NASA agency deputy CIO for strategy. That's some kind of pivot to me.
That's an amazing pivot. And I think it's a good reflection, right? As part of this career journey, in defining our version of authenticity, defining our values. Like you said, what is the impact that you want to leave in the room and with other people?
Yes.
And we see from your journey, opportunity after opportunity, not that they were easy won, but opportunity after opportunity, and ultimately that culminating in a reward named after you because of the level of integrity and morality and high achievement that you brought to each office that you were in.
And I will tell you something, Alicia. We can never get complacent. We can never get comfortable. We can never get quiet. I fought all the way through my NASA career. I had to fight for everything. Nothing was given to me. Nothing was handed to me. I had to prove myself and prove myself again, right? The individual who filled the position that I vacated as a JSC CIO when she came in, it was rough. It was so bad until that person almost had all of the other center CIOs in a coup against me. It was bad. I never forget this. My little apartment in Arlington, Virginia, I would walk around my little apartment. I would pray every morning and I would just say, this isn't right. This isn't right. But I've been here before. I'm going to have to trudge through this. And see, that's the other thing. The more you go through the fire, the more you go through the lesson, you say, okay, I've been here before. This is a maturation process. Now is the time to use it, to apply that, right? So that's what we're called on to do now as we mature in our leadership, in our careers. You learn that back there. Now apply it and use it to move you forward and to propel you forward. And so when it was happening again, my last year in my career, when I was getting ready to retire, and it was horrible, and I put my badge on the table, and I said, there are people suffering in silence. I am not going to stay quiet while this is happening. And so let's fast forward. I was going to retire December, the year before I retired. And I stayed because something was happening. I didn't know what was happening, but something was going on, right? And I got a call in December from my boss, and I was going to stay until the end of June. That person was gone in January. They didn't even make a year. See, sometimes, and you can relate to this, sometimes we just need to get out of God's way. Sometimes we just need to trust Him.
Sometimes we have to weather the storm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How do you know the difference of when it's weathering the storm or it's time for you to pivot because this environment no longer aligns with you authentically?
So here's how I made the decision. Do I retire in December or do I stay an extra 6 months, right? Retiring in December would have been about Annette. Staying the extra 6 months would have been about those people who were suffering in silence and who were being mistreated. And I said to myself, I'm going to make sure those people get on the other side of this, because at that point, it was not about Annette. It was about those individuals who I wanted to make sure had a good experience, a fair experience, a decent experience, a right opportunity, a good opportunity. That was always my why. My why was never about Annette.
Miss Annette left me so inspired. Her career journey was not for the weak, but she found strength in her faith, her family, mentorship, and in her non-negotiables. When you examine her journey more closely, you find that authenticity is really about character. It's our brand, our impact, our approach. It's who you choose to be, your why for being here, and how you operate and lead. Your authenticity is based on your values, but like Annette said, they will be challenged. You have to decide the values that will not only guide your career, but what you will actually stand for. As you imagine the future of your career, I urge you to consider the following. Do you want to be the example of what to be or what not to be? But then, what are you willing to pay the price for? What are you willing to be excluded for? What are you willing to weather the storms for? And ultimately, what will be your impact on others? When I think of all of you listening, I imagine myself speaking to the future senior and executive level leaders that will take the technology industry to new heights. But it will not be a battle easy won. Now is the time for you to explore what your non-negotiables are, so that when you're faced with oppositions along the way, you can stand authentically and not compromise. Learn how to maneuver with discernment. Have your silver bullets. I'm not talking about switching up or selling out, but you cannot navigate every space the same way. Don't you be the reason for your limited opportunities. As you mature in your career, you've got to learn how to read the rooms you're invited into. And as my friend Angela says, you have to show up appropriate. That way you can make space for someone else. As we wrapped up our conversation, I asked Annette to share any parting thoughts for early career Black women or those transitioning into the field who want to build authentic careers in the technology workplace.
The best investment you can make, other than investing in others, is investing in knowing yourself, right? Be the best that you can be. You be best, top of the line of your craft, of your skill. Get the experience that you need from different disciplines, different areas. Spread yourself where you get that knowledge, you get that experience, you get that understanding. Get a variety of mentors because you need a variety of perspectives. Look around the world. It doesn't all look like you, right? And you're going to be leading teams that don't just look like you. And you have to be relatable and you have to be able to relate. Don't be so quick to rush in.
Yeah.
It's okay to hang back. It doesn't mean you're compromising or you're selling out because you don't raise your voice. Know when to raise your voice. And just as important and critical as that is to know when not to raise your voice.
Thank you so much, Annette, for sharing your story. I'm finally calling you by your first name. It took so much to get here. just in seeing your story and seeing your career, the respect is ever so warranted. And thank you not only for your service, but thank you for being here with us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you. I don't take this lightly. I prayed before this session and I prayed that God would use me, would give me the words that I could help someone. I am so humbled and so grateful that you would give me this opportunity and provide this platform. I'm excited for what you're doing. And I just know that his hand is on you and that he's got something pretty amazing coming your way. I just believe that.
I really hope you enjoyed this episode. Take some time to reflect on what you heard here. Be sure to follow us on IG and subscribe to our newsletter on Substack. Find us at Thriving in the Game on both. If you have a comment or recommendation, DM or email me. You can find my email in the show notes. I'd love to hear from you as we build community around thriving in the game. Until next time, take care.